Welcome everyone to our 17th Zoom panel discussion. It is especially wonderful to be here with you all today in midsummer and once again to be offering you a fresh look into an important but little understood aspect of Japanese art. Hopefully all of you joining us from around the world are experiencing a reopening of your local cultural activities and national sites. That life there is beginning to feel a bit normal as we are happily experiencing in New York today. As proved true from our prior related panel on the tradition of Japanese tea, our Zoom programming continues to attract a growing audience from around the world. Tonight, we have over 500 registrants from 14 countries, from Australia, India, Korea, and Japan, to France, Russia, Switzerland, Germany, and then on to Argentina, Brazil, and Mexico. Welcome to all of you who are waking up early in Asia to join us, or those of you who are staying up very late in Europe, Ukraine, and Russia to hear our exciting program. Thank you. From the US, we have registered guests from over 32 states, comprised of many curators, academicians, collectors, dealers, auction house experts, art appraisers, and this time, not surprisingly, many conservators from museums spanning the country. For this reason, as we have such a large number of registrants, we have moved from our prior more community-focused format of Zoom to a more formal webinar. While less intimate and less community-spirited, this format allows our speakers to better focus on what they're trying to communicate to you. Now, to address tonight's topic, Kintsugi repair is a traditional method for restoring broken ceramics using plant resin lacquer sprinkled with powder gold, or less commonly silver. The idea of making the repair overtly visible is the antithesis of traditional Western methods of restoration that seeks to camouflage such needed repairs and recreate the work to be what we would call as good as new. Also, contrary to the Western understanding of the art of restoration, in some cases, as you shall soon hear and see, it serves to elevate the appreciation and possibly even augment the value of such a formerly damaged work. Indeed, Kintsugi may be seen as transformative to the work itself, and it is firmly grounded in the Japanese refined appreciation of the beauty of imperfection. Here on the screen, you see a small sake cup by the remarkable Shimane area master Ajiki Hiro, in which he uses kintsugi. Here he adheres a piece of glass into the intentionally broken mouth. Kintsugi has become his aesthetic of choice for a newly created work. But perhaps putting the cart before the horse, I am showing you a colossal work by the master Suzuki Goro from his celebrated patchwork series. Obviously, the execution of such an enormous ceramic work of art, outscaled for any kiln, would require assemblage of separated parts fired independently. Here, not only does Suzuki Sensei seam the works together with kintsugi, but he also flaunts the effect by using a wide range of glazes and patterns to highlight what we might call the patchwork effect. As you can see here, the word kintsugi and the foreign appropriation of its aesthetic has entered the lexicon of Western design marketing with products as widely disparate as do-it-yourself repaired kits, Limoges, dinnerware by Bernardeau of France, nail polish, automobiles, and even cigars. Truly, anything is possible. But our focus here tonight will be to turn our attention away from these Western appropriations into modern culture and turn back to the Japanese roots of kintsugi. We will attempt to chart its historical path, as well as illuminate the actual process for its creation. I must tell you, the idea for this panel originated not with me, but with one of tonight's presenters, Mina Brenneman, an art historian, a lover of Japanese ceramics, and collector. She not only promoted this subject as a worthy topic, but also helped to coordinate our speakers. And for this, I am most grateful. Thank you, Mina. So to illuminate us on this uniquely Japanese approach to conservation, we have arranged a marvelously diverse panel of 4 experts. I will introduce each of them ahead of their first question. But before starting, I must also thank Asia Week New York for their support and partnership on our Asian art-related educational programming. Please note, everyone, that Asia Week will be an in-person event opening on September 17th here in New York and will be spanning numerous auctions across the city, in-person gallery shows, together with an online sales venue for those dealers who are unable to come and visitors who are unable to come to New York. Additionally, I must also recognize and thank my amazing gallery team who has worked so hard on each of our programs. Chelsea Cooksey, our gallery director, and most especially Bonnie Lee, who so artfully and, dare I say, tactfully puts together our PowerPoint presentations and does the much needed rehearsing with our gifted panels. So let's get started. My first question is for Bonnie Kemske.
Right.
Let me first, actually, before I give her a question, let me introduce Bonnie to you, because I think many of you are not lucky enough to know her. Bonnie is an American living in the UK and is a professional ceramic artist and writer. She has received her PhD from the Royal College of Art. She has published books, featured articles, catalog essays, book chapters, as well as reviews of exhibitions and books. She was editor of Ceramic Review and is also a BBC contributor. Her latest book, Kintsugi, The Poetic Mend, published by Bloomsbury, draws on her experience and training in both ceramics and Japanese tea ceremony, as well as her research in Japan, to weave together Kintsugi's history, its contemporary use, and its strong metaphor through essays and personal stories. And I must say, I have consumed her book with great pleasure and highly recommend it. And you can see it perched behind me on my desk there. So Bonnie, for those of us who are here tonight and may not know what it is, could you please define the term Kintsugi for us? What does it signify and what is its application? And briefly, could you articulate to us how and why it emerged first in Japan? Bonnie.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Joan. Thank you for the introduction. And thank you for hosting this event, which gives me the opportunity to talk about Kintsugi, which is wonderful. So Kintsugi, actually, if we start with the word itself, it means gold joining. And there's another word that you'll come across, which is kintsukuroi, which means gold mending. They're pretty much used interchangeably. There's a nuance of difference, but don't worry about that. But what's really important to know now is that, especially in the West, the word has come to be an umbrella term, and it's now rather loosely applied to almost any ceramic repair where the cracks are highlighted, whether they're in gold or some other color, red, silver, whatever. So Kintsugi, it's a 300-year-old Japanese repair technique, as far as we can understand. It's important to say that it is not a ceramics technique, it's actually a lacquer technique. It's used to cover, to repair objects made of various materials, but we most often associate it with the repair of ceramics. As we see in this Stephanie Hamill plate, who's an Australian potter. In recent years, ceramicists have also been learning the skills of Kintsugi and applying them in their own studios. So there are actually many qualities of Kintsugi, as there are broken pots and Kintsugi repairers. So the repair can be very fine, or it can be coarse. It can use a tiny amount of gold, or it can use a plethora. The gold or the metal can have a dull or a lustrous shine, or it can be brilliant and glittery. So be careful not to think that Kintsugi repairs are all the same, because they're not. So what does Kintsugi actually do? Well, first, it reinstates function. It makes what's unusable usable again. Secondly, Kintsugi is decorative, by which I mean that it adds distinctive ornamentation. In this case, I think that the Kintsugi appears quite graphic, almost calligraphic. And finally, Kintsugi always tells a story, and that story always carries within it a powerful metaphor. I think we'll be talking about that a bit later. In Japan, there's a saying that everything that has a form breaks. That might sound obvious, but I think as Westerners, we sometimes battle against the fact that things break. We also have trouble accepting that broken things will still have value. In fact, they can ultimately be more beautiful and even more valuable. So a Kintsugi repaired object will never be, as Joan said, it will never be as good as new. That's not the aim of Kintsugi. The repair will never hide the pot's damage. It will instead affirm its scars. So Kintsugi is about repairing those things in our lives that we feel are irreplaceable. Kintsugi could really only have developed within Japan. First, the Japanese people live with cracks and breaks. Japan has over 1,500 earthquakes every year, and many, many more tremors, daily tremors. So Japan's long history and the unrelenting frequency of earthquakes really reinforces an acceptance of life as imperfect and precarious. Furthermore, when Kintsugi developed, cracks in pots were already part of the tea ceremony aesthetic, specifically part of the wabi aesthetic. Although I don't believe that all Kintsugi pots are wabi or express wabi, it's certainly true that Kintsugi would not have developed without an appreciation of imperfection, irregularity, incompleteness, and impermanence, all of which are wabi aesthetics. So I believe there's going to be more talk about this as well later on. So the resources of late 17th, early 18th century Japan and the circumstances of the time came together to create Kintsugi. And I've defined it as 4 elements. The first being urushi, which is Japanese lacquer. So Kintsugi uses urushi in several ways. The lacquer is tapped from trees found only in East Asia. It's then refined, the sap is then refined. In Japan, the earliest artifact that we have found that dates with urushi on it dates back to about 5000 BCE, so the Jomon era, so it's very early. I think Gen's going to be talking about the tapping later on, which is great. The second element is gold, and gold was discovered in Japan in 749 CE, but it's played a part in Japanese aesthetic from a much earlier time than that. Then the technique that's used, the third element, is makie, or sprinkled picture. So these skills, the makie, the lacquer art skills, were already highly developed at the time of Kintsugi's beginning. And it is actually makie-shi or makie practitioners or artists who are the ones who traditionally do Kintsugi repairs. So this style of Kintsugi is sometimes called makie naoshi because it uses these traditional makie techniques. You can see the regular Kintsugi repair on the right-hand side, the crack, but then on the fill-in where they've used a black lacquer to fill in, they've then added additional makie decoration. So this photo is actually taken over my shoulder during my chanoyu practice. Chanoyu, or tea ceremony, really did play a crucial role in Kintsugi's development. In fact, its powerful presence is what gave Kintsugi the foundation that it needed to flourish. So what is considered the peak of chanoyu's development coincides roughly with the development of Kintsugi. Tea is a high or an elite art form, or at least it was then and still is to a large extent. It was the wealthiest of society who practiced tea. That's the nobility, the rich merchant class, etc. But more importantly, tea ceremony was deeply embedded in politics and in court culture, which meant that tea utensils sometimes became extremely important and valuable. For instance, a daimyo or a warlord could reward someone serving under him, say a successful military commander, by giving him a famous tea bowl rather than giving him land or money. So this tea bowl would, of course, then be imbued with the power of loyalty and fealty. and it would serve as a concrete connection between vassal and lord. So if such an object should be broken, the owner certainly wouldn't discard it, and neither would they just put it away. The irreplaceable tea bowl would have to be repaired. And remember that in tea, objects are not put on display the way they are here. They're used. So the repair had to be practical. So what better way to repair it than to use gold, the most valuable substance known, and to commission some of the most skilled craftsmen of the day to do the work. So thanks. I hope that's an overview and answers the question. I'll stop so we can go on to other questions and answer. I'm eager to hear them.
Well, Bonnie, that you set an amazing stage for us, and I think we all have a foundation by which we can now listen to our other speakers illuminate the points that you have brilliantly pointed out to us. Thank you. Our next speaker is Meghen Jones. Most of you know her well because she was just a speaker 2 Zoom panels ago on Rosanjin. Meghen is the Associate Professor of Art History at the New York State College of Ceramics of Alfred University, where she teaches courses on East Asian material and visual culture and global ceramic history. Trained in ceramic craft design at Musashino Art University in Tokyo, she received her PhD in the history of art and architecture from Boston University with a dissertation on the modern ceramist Tomimoto Kenkichi. Her recent publications include Ceramics and Modernity in Japan, co-edited with Louise Court, and the article Hamada Shoji Kita Oji Rosanjin and the Reception of Japanese Pottery in the Early Cold War United States, published in Design and Culture in 2017. She is currently working on an exhibition of the idiom of the tea bowl in global perspective for the Alfred Ceramic Art Museum, which we are all very anxious to be able to travel up and see with our own eyes. So Meghen, let me offer you your first question. As an art historian and someone passionate about ceramics, can you enlighten us about Kintsugi's history? And please tell us more about the context in which the art of Kintsugi emerged. How were lacquer and other materials, most especially gold, used on ceramics for either decoration or repair? Meghen.
Thank you, Joan. It's great to be here. I have been really excited about this panel for some time, and it's wonderful how it follows on the amazing panel of, what was that, about a month ago on chanoyu. Okay, so in the discourse of Kintsugi today, so much is made, of course, of its very poignant aesthetics. And I'd like to touch on those later. There's also a really fascinating history of its materials. So in this 2,000-plus-year-old bowl, we see red lacquer painting on black ground. It's the resin sap of the Asian tree called Rhus vernicifera, as Bonnie pointed out a moment ago, and sometimes it's referred to as the plastic of the ancient East Asian world for its tremendous usefulness in strengthening and making more impervious to water its substrate. And it's particularly helpful when that substrate is something like water-absorbing earthenware, like this. So this bowl really establishes lacquer as decoration on ceramics, and it dates to Japan's prehistoric period. What's important is that we simply don't see this degree of lacquer use on ceramic in other areas of Asia then or since. In prehistoric pots, for example, from Yangshao, China, we see comparable black and red surface paintings, but those are in mineral pigments, not lacquer. Also key is that people in the Jomon period, as early as 4,500 years ago, we know used lacquer as an adhesive to bind broken pots. In other parts of the world, repairers used not lacquer at that time, but things like bitumen, and that goes back over 6,000 years ago in Western Asia. They also used pine resin, animal hide glues, and even hot tapioca or fermented cheese. Now we speed up more than a millennium. And so what about gold? I know Bonnie introduced this, and I'll talk more about gold here. We see here not gold as repair as in Kintsugi, but as a mounting on the rim of this Song Dynasty tea bowl. It's one of 14 ceramics designated national treasures in Japan, and of the type imported to Japan by Zen monks. The gold covers an otherwise likely thin, rough-edged rim, resulting from the highly viscous glaze running down the bowl's walls. And Jianware bowls like this mainly received their gold banding in Japan. Dingware porcelains often received metal banding in China, but not the Jianware, which was so coveted in Japan. So the earliest connoisseurs of tea utensils in Japan adored these sorts of Chinese ceramics imported from China, and gold as kintsugi may represent a similar impulse to apply gold, albeit towards much different aesthetic goals. Not all Chinese tea bowls, of course, had precious metal rims. And here we see a very famous Longchuan ware Celadon bowl made around the same time as the Jianware bowl I just showed you, but repaired 2 centuries later in the late 15th century. According to the Edo period scholar Ito Togai, it was owned by the shogun and chanoyu aficionado Ashikaga Yoshimasa. When it had the major breaks that we see here, he had it sent to China for it to be reproduced. But instead, it came back repaired with these iron rivets that resembled large locust insects. Partially drilling the ceramic body and applying metal rivets was the norm for such repair of a ceramic object treasured this much in China, and at that time and before in China, as well as later in Europe. But the story goes, Yoshimasa was not pleased. Many recent texts on kintsugi recount how it was this riveting, pardon the pun, 15th century repair done in China that prompted the wish for a more aesthetically pleasing style of repair in Japan. And it was at this time that ceramics collecting in Japan became such that the rarest, most cherished pots were treated as the highest strata, or amongst the highest strata of art objects. So it goes without saying that owners didn't want to simply toss them into garbage heaps. They wanted to repair them in an artful way, but they also wanted repairs that kept the utensils in working order. And here's a key difference compared to repairs in other parts of the world. And this is, again, as Bonnie mentioned earlier, keeping the utensils in working order. Even the best fitting metal rivets would lead to leaking and corrosion. Lacquer, in contrast, protects the object from oxidation and prevents tea from leaking. So gold lacquer repair emerged in Japan by the late 16th century and became more widespread in the 17th. And here's another Longchuan ware bowl also subjected to the application of metal by an owner, but of course of a much different effect, done in Europe. Yoshimasa was likely not aware of its gold treatment done a few decades before by a count of a state in what is now Germany. It's interesting to frame the context of gold additions to ceramic and patronage with an example like this, I think. Katzenol Bogen, the first, likely acquired it in Acre, Israel, while on pilgrimage to the Holy Land. And the artisans who applied its silver gilt, essentially a gold coating, and its enameled coat of arms of the patron were, like the artisans a century later in Japan, indulging the impulses of the patron. And we can see this process of applying gold as a means of instantiating precious ceramic objects like this into the owner's particular habitus. By the late 16th century in Japan, gold mining from epithermal deposits propelled what we now refer to as Japan's golden age, the Momoyama period. So it's unsurprising kintsugi comes about when it does. The feudal lord Toyotomi Hideyoshi and other warrior patrons commissioned many, many works of gold, such as monumental screen paintings. And they were passionate, as we know, about chanoyu, the tea ceremony. So while Hideyoshi's portable tea room that we see here covered in gold with gold utensils was a one-off until, of course, in the late 20th century when it was reconstructed, gold and chanoyu would have a lasting bond for centuries to come through kintsugi.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Megan. A lot to learn. I definitely want to hear more about how the Japanese tradition for kintsugi worked on Chinese ceramics back at the beginning in those early days. And more detective work to be done. That sounds great. Our next presenter is actually a man who does the work himself, Gen Saratani. Gen is a lacquer restorer as well as a lacquerware artist. And he lives in, luckily for us, here in Brooklyn, New York. In Queens, New York, and is therefore available to those of us who might mistakenly damage something in their possession. He works exclusively with organic materials found in the traditional fine arts of Japan. He was born in Japan, and following high school and college studies in the arts, he served a 3-year apprenticeship with his father, Saratani Tomizo, a lacquer artist. This was followed by a 2-year apprenticeship in the study of lacquer under Takeda Akira in Kyoto. In 2012, he boldly moved to Queens, New York, where he now resides and works as the only urushi master in this country. So again, thank you for being with us tonight. It's great to have you. And my first question to you is, as a lacquer restorer, as well as a lacquerware artist, can you please tell us about the technical aspects of kintsugi? What tools and materials are used? What are the steps and resulting duration of the process? And specifically, can you tell us more about the nature of urushi as a versatile material that is the essence of kintsugi repair? Again?
Okay, thank you, John. And first of all, I would like you to remind that I am urushi, the Japanese lacquer art person, not the ceramic person, as Bonnie mentioned before. Kintsugi is a technique to repair ceramics using urushi art technique. So all kintsugi methods actually belong to urushi art. And what is urushi? Urushi is a sap from a tree. As you see, we make scratches on the bark of trees that are over 15 years old, and the sap comes out like a maple syrup. But the sap does not flow easily, so we use tools, as you see here, to scrape off the sap. We only can collect about 200 grams of urushi from one tree, and the tree dies after harvest. This makes the urushi more rare and expensive than the other synthetic paintings or glue. Urushi has many varieties of use, as shown in the picture. But simply, urushi's main characteristic is that it gets very, very hard after drying, and it lasts very long, even over a few thousand years. And nothing can damage the surface or melt of the urushi glue, even chemicals available now. So it's very useful and durable. Now, let's look at the actual kintsugi process. We make urushi glue by mixing urushi with wheat flour or rice powder. We then wiggle together the shards. Okay. Back to the right position and let dry in a very high humid box for over a few weeks because urushi only cures under very high humidity. Next, we scrape off or sand off the extra glue and apply urushi putty, mixing urushi and fine grind stone powder to fill minor damages left, like small chips, holes, cracks, or dents. Then we sand off the putty with charcoal or grindstones to make the putty flat and smooth. Then we usually apply red urushi, mixed urushi and red pigment to make the surface even more smooth and flat. In the final step, we filter the red urushi to be dustless and then use it to paint over the cracks. So it acts like a glue for the gold powder. Finally, we sprinkle the gold powder onto it. And this is an example of a very simple Kintsugi repair that I did. The video shows the gold decoration process, but we also have multiple color options of repair, as you see on the picture, and other metal color options like silver, copper, brass, aluminum, platinum, and maybe more. But I feel like over 90% of such repair has gold decoration. Maybe because we all love gold, of course, and gold is food safe and hard to oxidize. So I think the combination of urushi and gold is the best to make a strong, natural, and beautiful repair that still can't be replaced with any other materials.
That was great, Gen. And I must apologize because I neglected the second half of your biography. And so I will tell everyone now about your further credentials. As an urushi lacquerware artist, he has also conserved thousands of works for collectors in this country. He has lectured and led workshops and given demonstrations on lacquerware making and conservation at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, Museum of Art and Design, FIT, Parsons, and numerous other institutions. So we're very lucky to have you with us here tonight. Thank you again. And your final question is, Kintsugi is in the zeitgeist and is being applied to many different fields in various ways. Can you give us some examples of this contemporary practice, both in the creation of objects and in the metaphoric referencing? Furthermore, how is Kintsugi understood in Japan? Why do you think it has such appeal to we in the West?
Well, thank you. And Mina's going to be showing us some wonderful examples of contemporary Kintsugi in ceramics. But before we get there, let's look at some other fields. So let me back up a minute. In her book, Repair, The Impulse to Restore in a Fragile World, the philosopher Elizabeth Spellman asserts that the drive to repair is universal. She goes so far as to refer to humans as homo reparans. So this drive to repair must have its roots in our ability to use tools to manipulate the things around us. And of course, the brains that enable this also allow for ideation. And it's our ability to think and therefore to create stories that leads to metaphor. This is Nekowari Day. Good metaphors are transformative. They don't need to be articulated, we just feel them. As an American, albeit one who lives in the UK, however, I can't keep myself from articulating it constantly. In contrast, when I was researching the Kintsugi book in Japan, most people, rather than explain the metaphor, would tell me a story. So for instance, I was interviewing Raku Kichizaemon 15 and his wife Fujiko, and she told me how they had served a friend tea using this famous tea bowl. I have to say it is a fantastic tea bowl. She served me tea in it as well. It's quite overwhelming. But this friend's business had recently failed and he saw no hope at all in his future. A year later, he wrote to them to say that he had thought of this bowl throughout the year, the implication being that it was the Kintsugi repair that had shown him that he could overcome his loss and come out better on the other side, which he did. So loss and recovery, tragedy and the ability to overcome it. A Kintsugi repair speaks of individuality and uniqueness, of fortitude and resilience. So with a metaphor as powerful as this, you can imagine that in the West, it's widely used, sometimes even promiscuously used. So I keep a Google alert going for Kintsugi. And over the past couple of years, I have, of course, come across many, many examples. As an aside, not all references to Kintsugi give much time to its metaphor. Here's one of my favorites, these Kintsugi sneakers. And these just made me laugh out loud when I spotted them at a high-end shop in London. One thing you will never see are identical Kintsugi pieces. I've also come across Kintsugi pillows, t-shirts, jewelry, cakes, car, glass, even a Cadbury's cream egg. It's also used a lot in popular music and in literature. And this is artist Victor Solomon's take on Kintsugi. I wanted to use at least one installation piece. It's a basketball court in South Los Angeles. And what he said about this is, I've been thinking about the parallels between sport as a uniting platform to inspire healing and my ongoing experiments with the technique of Kintsugi that embellishes an object's repair with gold to celebrate its healing as a formative part of the journey. But perhaps this is the best example of how widely the concept of Kintsugi has penetrated popular culture. An example that does draw on its metaphor. In the final episode of Star Wars, Kylo Ren's broken helmet is reforged with seams of red. It makes an overt reference to Kintsugi, which the director J.J. Abrams acknowledges. But it's not only physical objects where the metaphor has been used. Here's a snapshot from a bulletin board spotted by writer and curator Garth Johnson. It represents for me how widely Kintsugi has been used as a model for spiritual healing. I would dearly love to know what Kintsugi worship involves. It's interesting to me as well that this doesn't explicitly say it's from a Christian church. I think perhaps it's a more universalist approach, or it's made to draw a non-faith participation, not sure. But one reason underneath that I believe Kintsugi is so popular in the West, especially in the US, is that the Kintsugi metaphor feeds directly into the Christian inheritance that's found in much of our society. And this legacy lives on in our culture, whether or not Christian belief lives on. So Kintsugi's been used as a metaphor for all kinds of therapies, some well-established and others perhaps more off the wall. This book is one of the most popular in psychotherapy. It's by Tomás Navarro, who's a psychiatrist in Spain. I've also come across the Kintsugi metaphor being used to help with mindful living, recovery from major surgery or other physical trauma, inclusive design as an exit strategy for sex workers, and significantly as a model for environmental sustainability. As I mentioned, with my own background, I can't help but see and feel the metaphor Kintsugi in my world, including in what I'm reading. So I'm just going to read this wonderful quote aloud for you from Chris Cleave's novel, Little Bee. It expresses Kintsugi so well that I can't resist sharing it. On the girl's brown legs, there were many small white scars. I was thinking, do those scars cover the whole of you? I thought that would be pretty. And I ask you right here, please, to agree with me that a scar is never ugly. That is what the scar makers want us to think. But you and I, we must make an agreement to defy them. We must see all scars as beauty, okay? This will be our secret, because take it from me, a scar does not form on the dying. A scar means I survived. Thank you.
That was so beautiful. It's hard to go forward after that. That certainly says it all. But it's the metaphor is so striking. It's hard to focus just on ceramics, but we are going to turn our direction away from psychotherapy back to clay. Our final speaker, but not the final question, will go to Mina Mina Brenneman received her PhD in Slavic language and literatures and art history from Yale University and has a master's in art market studies from FIT. Her 2019 thesis on the Japanese ceramic artist Hayashi Yasuo was translated into Japanese and was just published in Kyoto. Mina works in research marketing at Morgan Stanley here in New York. She loves going on pilgrimages, mountain climbing, hiking, and performing in the Argentine tango. Mina can do almost anything. Mina, as a collector, how did you come to have an object with Kintsugi repair in your own collection? Can you tell us about the appeal of the visible repair and how to you personally, how do you appreciate it? Seeing it in your collection now, has such a treasured object come to life for you in ways you had never anticipated? Mina?
Hi, thank you. Thank you, Joan, both for the kind introduction and for the very thoughtful and very personal question. I have several objects with Kintsugi in my collection, but I'd like to talk about a small sencha cup with a Kintsugi repair by the Japanese potter and poet Otagaki Rengetsu. She was a divorced, then widowed, itinerant Buddhist nun who was one of the most important 19th century Japanese poets, one with a truly fascinating life story. This particular object is one of the foundational pieces in my collection, and it was very important to me, actually, that it has a Kintsugi repair. This sencha cup is one from an original set of 5. Rengetsu produced numerous 5-cup sets and inscribed them with poems that she selected thematically. As a rule, 4 of the poems were associated with the 4 seasons, and the 5th addressed a so-called matter of the heart. The poem on my cup that you see on the screen is clearly autumn, and it's worth noting that Rengetsu's poetic selection ensured that not only were the cups a lovely set, ceramically speaking, but that the poems also formed a coherent and meaningful cycle of poems. This cup and the set to which belonged is a collaboration between Rengetsu, who inscribed her original poem and signed it, and Kinkozan Sobei VI, the then head of the Awata kiln, which is considered to be the oldest of the Kyoto kilns. One can date the cup to the 1860s, when Rengetsu was well established and famous enough to collaborate with someone of the caliber of Kinkozan VI. This cup came into my possession in a most curious way, which confirms my sense that pieces sometimes find their collectors in a way that truly boggles the imagination. It really was a series of incredible synchronicities and serendipity that brought this to me at a very important juncture in my life and became a life-changing event. It came to me already with the Kintsugi repair in place. It didn't break while already part of my collection. I had been seeking a work by Rengetsu with a Kintsugi repair, and this piece was perfect for several reasons. Now, if I can show it to you, I hope you can see it on the screen. It is broken pretty neatly down the middle into almost equal halves and 2 smaller fragments. There is also a piece that was missing and had to be filled in with putty and covered with the urushi lacquer and gold powder. And I can't help thinking that the very shape of the fracture symbolizes the 2 equal halves into which Rengetsu's own life was broken. By age 42, she had lost 2 husbands, all of her children, 5 or 6 of them actually, and all of her adopted family, as well as the roof over her head. And it was at this critical juncture that she reinvented herself as a potter poet and spent the next 42 years of her life creating an incredible following and legacy. And this sencha cup is particularly important and valuable to me because it goes to the heart of the reasons why I collect, as well as how I decide which objects to include in my collection. I don't have a big and systematic collection at all. Mine is small, quirky, and not based on, say, categories such as a particular period, region, or type of object. I believe my own background is relevant here. I was born in Bulgaria under communism and didn't grow up in a culture of material plenty. We had quite few personal possessions, and I was taught by my parents that to take extremely good care of everything I owned. And there was definitely a sense that once an object was broken, it was forever diminished or marred, no matter how carefully and seamlessly repaired. Repairs were purely functional, and there was no added aesthetic element such as we see in Kintsugi. So to me, Kintsugi, which emphasizes and beautifies the scars, was a stunning concept when I came upon it. And as a collector, I continued to learn more about Kintsugi to enrich my understanding of works in my own collection and to develop new pathways of thought to further expand my collection. In his book, Fewer Better Things, Glenn Adamson describes the kind of remembering through things that we find in Kintsugi as, quote, an intuitive drive that speaks to the most fundamental of human psychological needs, where material intelligence and emotional intelligence overlap, end quote. The latest addition to my library is a new book, Kintsugi and the Cycle of Nature, a meditation on Japanese lacquer arts, written by Mio Heki. It's a bilingual book published very recently in Japan. And it's not only wonderfully informative piece of writing, but a beautiful physical object in itself. So for me, ultimately, the Rengetsu Sencha cup is on the one hand, an exquisite material object that is surrounded by dozens of stories, stories about Rengetsu herself, stories about Kinkozan 6, stories about the 5-cup set and its travels through space and time. What happened to the other 4 cups? Who was their original owner? How did my cup get broken? Who repaired it so masterfully? It's poignant to think that I'll never know most of these stories. There are layers of opaqueness and mystery, which will always be part of the aura of this object. But then on the other hand, there's the personal meaning that I, as this object's current owner, imbue in it. Where will it go after me? Will one of my kids keep it? Where and how will it travel through time? And what other stories will it collect on its path through time and space? In a way, coming full circle, it seems that the object, the Sencha cup, collects us, its makers, repairers, and owners. Isn't that a curious thought? It just struck me as completing the circle. So thank you, Joan, for the question.
That was amazing. And yes, your presentation opens so many avenues for investigation. I can only imagine what happened to the other 4. Was this the sole survivor? I have one quick question for you. Did this piece come with a box? Did the person who restored it actually box it, or you bought it unboxed? I don't know if we can switch back to Mina.
Yes.
Is there any
yes.
documentation that came with it?
No, unfortunately, this particular one did not come with a box. I should probably have a box made for it because it's very frustrating. Some of my other Rengetsu pieces come with boxes, you know, sort of with authentication from the abbots, and you know, there's a lineage there in terms of authenticating Rengetsu pieces. But this particular one is sort of bare and orphaned in that way.
Thank you. It was obviously meant to be in your possession. It was just waiting for you.
Thank
Beautiful
you.
story. Okay, I'm going to next turn back to Gen and ask the next question for him. Based on what we've just heard from you about the Kintsugi process, we now have a little bit of an understanding how the mending of an object requires you to take a unique and very thoughtful approach to each individual repair. Of course, as every breakage is distinctive, each repair must therefore present new challenges for you. Could you show us some specific examples of your restoration work, and that will show to us the distinctive nature of such kintsugi conservation? Again?
Okay. Okay, I will say that every piece is different and difficult for me, but mostly the number of shards affect the difficulty. But let me say I'm already working on this craft for over 25 years, so there's not much that it's too difficult or impossible for me anymore. But technically, one thing I have to focus on is when working on unglazed piece. I mentioned urushi is unremovable. So once I make a stain or a smudge like the piece on the image, there's no way to clean the surface anymore. So that's technically, that's the hard part. But let me pick something that challenged me a lot. These are the artists, these are from the artist, Tom Sachs. He's someone who discovered Kintsugi much earlier than recent boom. His first contact with me was in 2014, and his order was for Kintsugi art piece. At that time, I was a young craftsman, just starting my career in New York as an urushi restorer. And my stance at that time was to repair or restore in the proper and right way. And kintsugi was just a part of repair for me at that time. So I never felt I was an artist at that time because when we study traditional craft, urushi craft, we are forced to not add any personal intention or originality into the craft, not only to be right and proper, but moreover to become a good tool. So I never realized I did creative or artistic work. So when I heard Tom's order, it embarrassed me a lot. I don't know what to do. But what he said to me was I was already making artwork and he loves those. So this order was one of my most sentimental works that opened my eyes to be an artist. And since then, I start thinking about being both a good tool and also an artist. By the way, Tom's table all have unglazed surface, so it was truly hard for me, both technically and mentally. Thank you.
Thank you again. A lot of food for thought there, and much to learn still. I would now like to turn back to Meghen, and we're going to go back to tradition. Meghen, returning to the topic of chanoyu, can you tell us more about the relationship between kintsugi and treasured tea objects? As you are now so involved with the forthcoming exhibit at the Alfred Ceramic Art Museum, Path of the Tea Bowl, perhaps you might also show us examples of kintsugi works alongside better known antique tea bowls or chawan. Meghen?
Thanks, Joan. A really important question and one that touches on some themes already brought up tonight. Chanoyu, as Bonnie said, is the wellspring of kintsugi and so many facets of Japanese ceramics. The Taian tea house that I'm sure many of you recognize represents the mode of chanoyu practice crystallizing in the late 16th century when kintsugi emerges, we think. A mode that came to be known as wabi-cha, centered on simplicity, humbleness, irregularity, and stark beauty. This shift in taste of the time is attributed to a more spiritual search for meaning within the formalized preparation and social consumption of matcha. The late 16th century, as we know, was a time of great warfare, of European merchants and missionaries introducing new ideas, and of chanoyu. And as Andrew Watsky described it in last month's session, chanoyu was the leading avant-garde art form of this tumultuous age. The tea master Rikyu and others from Sakai merchant culture sought fresh expression from what was readily at hand, including the weathered and unpretentious. Before some tea bowls, I want to show you two meibutsu, or named chanoyu vessels, famously cracked, that have stories. I think it's important to establish a broader context for breakage and repair than simply ceramics. So indulge me here, please. Rikyu, whose later influence on generations of tea practitioners has been monumental, wrote, quote, "It's recommended that tea utensils should, in every way and aspect, fall rather short of perfection." The water jar on the right for use in chanoyu was not protected in a sagar during its firing. It collapsed with all sorts of kiln debris adhering to its surface. It was possibly owned by Furuta Oribe, the leading tea master after Rikyu. In a letter, Oribe wrote that since there will be never at any time any water jar quite like this, it should be repaired. Note how lacquer was placed in its deep fissures. It also didn't stand upright enough, so ceramic supports had to be added to its base. Another story. On the left is a famous bamboo vase attributed to Rikyu, said to have been made when he accompanied the feudal lord Toyotomi Hideyoshi's invasion of Odawara. Note the vertical split along its center. There's a story that during one tea gathering, it began to leak on the tokonoma floor, and a guest pointed this out. Rikyu is said to have replied that the dripping water was its life. The bamboo vase got the name Onjoji from Shoan, who was Rikyu's son-in-law and heir. Why name the bamboo vase Onjoji, the name of a temple just outside Kyoto? The temple is famous for a bronze bell that further makes complex this story. The bronze bell, like the bamboo vase, bears a long vertical crack and other scratches. The story goes that amidst the 10th century disputes between Tendai sect monks, the warrior monk Benkei dragged the bell to the top of Mount Hiei, where the bell started to cry out, "Ino, Ino," meaning "I want to go back" in Kansai dialect. And as we see here in this later book illustration, Benkei thrusts the bell down the mountain, forever scarring it. Rather than be repaired, the bell has been left as is and is today a tourist attraction. So certainly gold lacquer repair had the potential to, like the bamboo vase and the bell, impart a sense of what the object had gone through. The visible damages become part of the biography of the object. So now for a few tea bowls, and here's one in the, or soon to be in the Alfred Ceramic Art Museum exhibition Path of the Tea Bowl that opens in late September. Hope to see some of you there, and I hope to see many of you in our online conference that's scheduled for late October. So now for some tea bowls, an idiom frequently repaired with gold lacquer, as we've established. And tea bowls are frequently repaired with gold lacquer to the extent that, for at least some, the breakage was deliberate. This bowl is from the University of Michigan Museum of Art. Many early Kintsugi examples were Chinese, Korean, or Vietnamese ceramics. And Korean bowls became treasured amongst Wabicha connoisseurs and practitioners in the Momoyama period. Ceramics like this sparked a great interest in Korean pottery, so great that during the 1590s, Japanese invasions of Korea, potters were kidnapped and brought to Japan to set up workshops that in some cases continued to thrive, such as Hagi, as I'll come to in a moment. The wars from 1592 to 98 are sometimes referred to as the Yakimono Senso, or ceramics wars. So this was made in Gyeongsangnam in southeastern Korea, fairly close to Japan, but we don't know its exact provenance. It's not a meibutsu like the two objects I just showed you. It's not an object with a name. The kintsugi on it, however, suggests it was used as a tea bowl in Japan. And here, as in so many examples of kintsugi on tea bowls, we can read the gold veins as a type of keshiki, or landscape. Our imaginations could freely suggest what sort of landscape this might be. But a question remains, might this have been intentionally cracked? And so let me compare it to another very well-known meibutsu. Here we see a dramatically, intentionally broken tea bowl named shumi, the Japanese word for Mount Meru, the sacred mountain thought to be at the center of the physical and spiritual universe, according to Buddhism and other religions. Its other name is Jumonji, or cross. A record of 1727 states that its owner was Furuta Oribe, the same Oribe who treasured the burst bag water jar I just showed you. Here, Oribe, the story goes, thought the existing Korean tea bowl too big. The o-ido, or large well idiom, typically measures to 17 centimeters wide. Thus, this was reduced to 14.8 centimeters wide. Was it just about shrinking its size? Clearly, it was about more than that. Oribe was using his agency as an owner, as a tastemaker, to alter the very structure of the object and to impart onto it a new identity. And like Count Constantine Bogen, who I mentioned a few moments ago, it was a process in which he was instantiating this in a very particular way into his own realm. And here's another late 16th century Korean bowl that our Michigan bowl shares some attributes with. Veins of gold lacquer repair like this are called kawa no nagare, or flowing river. This was owned by Toyotomi Hideyoshi, who led the invasions of Korea and whose golden tea room we saw earlier. The story goes here that one day a page broke it. The daimyo Hosokawa Yusai is said to have composed a comic poem about the incident, a play on words from the well-known classical tales of Issei love story called Tsutsui Zutsu, meaning curb of a well, combined with isutsu, or 5 pieces. Those two elements and the name of its former owner, Tsutsui Junkei. So Tsutsui here means 2 different things. So here again, we have an example of a repair that forms a compelling biography of the object. It's not just repaired and aha, it's wabi-sabi. It's like it was named 5-5. If 5-5 is the name of a classical love story everyone reads in high school, and it was also owned by Mr. 5 and later broken in 5 pieces. Haha. Here's another important work. This is from the Johnson Museum, and this will be in our exhibition at Alfred. By the 17th century, as we see here, Japanese-made tea utensils were increasingly used. Raku, hagi, and karatsuware, amongst others, greatly appealed to wabi-cha tastes. And hagi kilns were established by descendants of Korean potters. The glaze has crackles. There's a set of diagonal incisions on the outer lower wall, and the red lacquer repairs combine to make this a great example of the taste for the imperfect and the worn. It's technically not kintsugi, as no gold was used, however, but it's in our exhibition, so I wanted to show it. And here's a well-known kintsugi example by the prominent rimpa artist Honami Koetsu. Gold figured prominently in many of his 2-dimensional works also. Just a brief point here, it's said that Koetsu both made the bowl and broke it with the break repaired meant to resemble melting snow. And then here we are in the 20th century. Yobitsugi is a grafting of shards from disparate originals soldered together with gold to create a patchwork pot. Yobitsugi is employed by artists today, as we saw earlier, such as Suzuki Goro. Momo, or peach, was a 90th birthday gift to the well-known industrialist and tea aficionado, Masuda Takashi. It's shards of hagiware, like the bowl I showed you a little while ago. So by this time in 1936, tea bowls were beginning to gain more iconic presence in the appraisal of Japanese ceramics. The host presents a bowl to the guest, establishing a clear social bond through the bowl. According to chanoyu scholar and antiquities dealer Oda Seiichi, quote, the highlight of the 2-person tea ceremony is the moment when the guest sips a bowl of tea served by the host. The tea bowl held in the hands at this moment is a place of heart contact between the host and the guest. So these few images I've shown are a snapshot of some of the varying ways gold lacquer repair developed since the 16th century. And it, of course, continues to see ever more compelling iterations. Thank you.
Thank you, Megan. That was illuminating and a wonderful appetizer to get us thinking about traveling up to Alfred this fall. Very exciting. Lots of wonderful treasures being brought to one place for comparative purposes will be vol au voyage, as the French say. Final question is to Mina, and after which we'll take questions from our audience. Mina, the visual aspect of Kintsugi is extremely appealing, and its aesthetics have inspired many contemporary artists, both in the West and in Japan, as we've been shown a little bit of so far. Where, from your perspective, can we find the influence of Kintsugi in the art of our current time? Mina?
Yes, I would like to touch on 3 contemporary artists, actually 2 Japanese and 1 Korean, all of whom have created bodies of works that pick up on different aspects of Kintsugi. I'm grateful to Meghen for mentioning Yobitsugi because that's a great segue into what I'd like to talk about, and you also, Joan, mentioning Suzuki Goro sensei, because I'd like to show you a Yobitsugi chawan from my own collection, the one that you see on the screen, one that Suzuki sensei created for a solo show at the Toyota City No Play Theater in the year 2000. According to the artist, no costumes are quite like ceramic yobitsugi, meaning patchwork, in that they combine pieces of colorful patterns. Suzuki sensei's yobitsugi technique originated from what he calls his success from failure, as he had to mend the pieces that broke in his kiln in preparation for an important upcoming show, since he didn't have time to make new ones. Liking the results, he ran with yobitsugi, and the rest, as they say, is history. So of the 3 artists I want to touch on, Suzuki sensei is the closest to the original concept of kintsugi, though his yobitsugi is really kani kintsugi or easy kintsugi, and in a way closer to the Western concept of collage or mosaic. He purposely, rather than accidentally, he purposely cuts and breaks and reassembles his pieces rather than relying on accidental breakage in order to perform kintsugi. Suzuki sensei is playful, irreverent, gleefully idiosyncratic, very eccentric, and endlessly creative. He seems to do everything with a light touch and great speed. For example, it seemingly takes him seconds to throw a chawan on the wheel, or at least it appears that way when you watch a demonstration. Then he draws pattern in black ink and cuts and slices the leather hard pieces with precision and gusto. After he makes the cuts, he marks how the pieces would fit back together. Then he bisque fires, glazes, refires, and uses glue to reassemble the objects. Finally, he applies urushi and gold powders, and the resulting pieces are both traditional and contemporary, both serious and playful. Now, in the photo you see here on the left, he's explaining how he cuts out a circular piece from a freshly thrown leather hard chawan. On my particular chawan, this circular piece glazed in oribe style carries one of Suzuki sensei's signature motifs, the light bulb, which symbolizes both a happy childhood and also the idea of learning and aspiration. The second artist I'd like to talk about is the Korean female artist Lee So-kyung, who is really fascinating. She's mostly a conceptual artist who studied Western painting at Seoul National University and then participated in residency programs in France and in the US. Her works range from sculpture, installation, video, painting, and drawing to performance. Her series of so-called translated vases is actually a rather small sliver of her overall artistic output, but one for which she's perhaps the most well-known. This series was inspired by the Korean tradition of destroying porcelain works that are not perfect. She collects pottery shards from master and ceramists kilns from across Korea, and then carefully classifies them in her studio and considers how they would best fit together into one of her assembled pieces. So as a result, her translated vases end up having a very organic shape that is bumpy and irregular, but very balanced at the same time. These sculptures can get quite large and visually extravagant, as you can see in the photo on the right, which was her contribution to the Venice Biennale of 2017. It's too bad that we don't have a human figure next to it so that you can truly appreciate, how large this is, filling the vertical space of the, those huge hangars that they have the Venice Biennale in at the Arsenale. So this looks both fragile and solid, grounded and seemingly taking flight, which is a hallmark of her translated vases. Interestingly, however, she herself does not believe she's practicing kintsugi with her translated vases. Of course, the very fact that her assemblages do not attempt to reproduce the original shape of the broken pieces takes them away from kintsugi. The artist displaying with the visual aesthetics of kintsugi as the golden seams of the rejoined pieces are very prominent, and her comments echo the values of traditional kintsugi. In an interview quoted by my wonderful co-panelist Bonnie Kemske in her new book on kintsugi, Yi So-kyung says, quote, "I'm attracted to failed, broken, or ephemeral things. Things in a broken state provide me with a chance to intervene. It's not about fixing or mending, but about celebrating the vulnerability of the object and ultimately myself. This broken state allows me to explore new narratives, which are not bound by hierarchy," end quote. In 2012, Yi So-kyung won the Korea Artist Prize, which supports artists of Korea to lead the 21st century art scene. Unlike the piece for the 2017 Venice Biennale, which puts fragments together in a vertiginous vertical formation, here, what you see on the screen, we have an impressive multitude of pieces scattered horizontally into an immersive installation. And this was her award-winning installation and piece for that 2012 prize. And finally, I'd like to touch on Yoko Ono, who stunningly to me is the oldest actually of our three contemporary artists. This was a little bit surprising to me, but here we go. She's a multimedia artist working in performance, film, installation, music, and writing. She was a groundbreaking force in conceptual art involving collaboration, audience participation, and social activism. She's the most conceptual, I would say, of the three artists I wanted to touch on. And like Yi So-kyung, whose work approximates the visual aesthetics of kintsugi, Ono works with the conceptual dimension of this practice. Meant Piece was first created and installed in 1966 and was one of the very pioneering pieces of conceptual art that invited audience participation. It has since gone through multiple reenactments and iterations all over the world, including in a current traveling show organized by the American Federation of Arts. Meant Piece doesn't involve urushi, gold powder, or any of the traditional materials needed for kintsugi. Instead, Ono sets out multiple fragments of broken china cups and saucers on a simple white table, which functions as a stage and invites viewers of the exhibit to transform the fragments of broken china into new objects with the help of simple materials like twine, glue, tape, and scissors. The mended objects are then displayed on simple white shelves behind the table. So like Yi So-kyung, Ono plays with scale and context in her treatment of kintsugi, but she goes one step further. by inviting viewer participation in this, radically questioning the division between art and the everyday, the artist and the viewer. Participating in Men Peace, the viewer gets to experience Ono's unique practice, both intellectually and physically. Men Peace embodies some of Ono's deepest beliefs, which may be read on the installation wall. And I'm going to quote, mend with wisdom, mend with love, mend your heart, it will mend the earth at the same time, end quote. To me, this sounds like a message that resonates particularly well with our current moment. And I'd like to note that it's particularly interesting also to me that Lee So-kyung and Yoko Ono, two contemporary female artists, have each emphasized the two major aspects of Kintsugi, the visual aesthetic versus the conceptual, totally adapting and reinventing this traditional practice in a very modern context. Each of them is very aware of the limits of what she's doing. And while neither claims to be engaging in Kintsugi, neither also strains or destroys the rich metaphor, but instead plays with it with great sensitivity and deep understanding.
Thank you, Mina. What an amazing way to end our panel tonight. I saw that installation reinterpreted by the Gardner Museum of Toronto, where not only were people asked to put pieces together and make an assemblage, but then to hang them. So the entire gallery became a mobile, if you wish, with hanging porcelain elements designed by individuals. It was very moving and very evocative. So it's interesting to see how different approaches by different institutions create different works of art with the same conception by the artist who presents the problem. Perfect. We have many questions. I don't know if we're going to get to all of them, but we'll start off with one that's more historic, which I think is an important question, which comes from one of our most learned colleagues, Louise Court. And I guess this question is for Meghen or Bonnie, or maybe Meghen. The dating of the emergence of Kintsugi is a subject of debate. Today, you, Meghen, suggested the late 16th century. Bonnie suggested the late 17th or early 18th century. Can either of you tell us a little bit more about this diverse point of view regarding the commencement of the Kintsugi tradition? Whoever wants.
I'll jump in. It's very difficult to ascertain many particular examples of early Kintsugi simply because there are so few historical records about the particulars of who was doing the lacquer repairs and when. It's a very tricky subject, and I thank Louise for an earlier conversation she had with me about Kintsugi and sharing some information with me about Kintsugi. So we might look to the late 16th century as the start, for example, by thinking about Tsutsui-zutsu. Hideyoshi died in 1598. So if it was done during his lifetime, that repair work would have been done in the late 16th century. And we know in the case of Oribe, indeed, if Oribe intentionally broke that bowl, I showed you the shumi bowl that I showed you, he died in 1615. So that act and the repair was probably of the late 16th or early 17th century. The koetsu bowl I showed you was done either in the late 16th or 17th century. So what we can establish for sure is that at first it seemed that the imports from China, from Korea, from Vietnam integrated Kintsugi repair. And then later, as the production levels of Japanese tea utensils increase, we start to see more and more Kintsugi repair on Japanese tea bowls. But it's a very important question, and I wish there was more historical data as opposed to apocryphal stories about these legendary figures. You know, most of the records of these stories date to the Edo period. So I'd be interested to hear what others have to say too.
Could I come in here? There we go. See if I can get a camera now. Could I come in here for a minute?
Please, Bonnie, thank you, Megan. That was great. More to learn. And Bonnie, since the question was asked to both of you, what is your opinion?
Well, first I must say that I think I misspoke. I think that we probably will never know when Kintsugi actually started, the first Kintsugi piece. But the way I like to think about it is I like to associate it with koetsu. And I know that that's probably, we don't have any definitive reason to do that, but koetsu both worked in makie and in gold and in ceramics. And so it all seems to come together at that point. And we know that Rikyu was not a big, I don't think Rikyu ever makes any reference to gold repairs. And the Shumi piece, the Oribe piece, there's no gold in that, is there? It's just the lacquer. So I think that the truth is we won't ever know, because Kintsugi is almost a non-thing. I mean, I was astounded in Japan. We would speak to curator after curator, and none of them had any records of when the Kintsugi was done or who had done the Kintsugi. It was as if it didn't exist. And, you know, it was like one of my tea colleagues once said that his teacher said to him, you should look through the Kintsugi to the pot. And that's sort of the attitude that it you know, why would you take a note of it? It's not important. So I don't know that we'll ever be able to tell, because we know when the bowls were made in some cases, but we don't know necessarily when they were repaired or when they had gold added to the repair, or there's no way really of knowing. Do you think? I'd be interested to hear if Louise has more to say about it.
I think we can see what Louise has to say. And Louise, if you want to type something in response, feel free. We had invited her to join us today, but she was otherwise occupied. So at least she's with us rather than as a speaker.
Yeah, and if I could just add real quick, one of the reasons I wanted to show Onjoji, the bamboo vase attributed to Senno Rikyu, is that it is dated 1590. So we can begin to map out, you know, a framework of when broken objects started to be integrated into the chashitsu. And that was certainly as early as 1590.
It's an important point. Thank you. Thank you, Megan. Maybe the next question will turn to Gen. One of our participants, Louise just piped in. I'll just, if you're not reading her line, she's as mystified as anyone, but appreciate the good ideas that you've all offered. So kudos to you guys. Gen, is there an alternative to using urushi among contemporary acrylics or glues that could be used to create a similar effect as lacquer?
Technically, yes. You could add any almost urushi on any glows, painting, or any materials, not only wood. You could apply urushi either on metal, glass, yeah, so plastics as well. Yeah, but the you can't do other, like you can't paint urushi, synthetic paint on urushi. It's not works. I don't know why, but mostly you can paint urushi on anything, but you can't paint something on urushi, like something synthetic. Yeah.
Thank you, Gen. Mina, a couple people have asked for you to reiterate the name of the new book on Kintsugi that you mentioned at the start of our panel. Everyone's desperate to go to Amazon and order it right away.
I don't believe it's available on Amazon, but let me just backtrack a little bit. and I can come back. I can go fetch it actually. It is written by Mio Heki. I will write it in the little chat session. The title is Kintsugi and the Cyclone on Japanese Lacquer Arts. I will type it in the chat session, and then I will run and get it if people want to see it. It's a beautiful object. It's one of those accordion, pull out, printed on both sides with visual graphics, beautiful graphics and bilingual text.
Terrific. Thank you, Mina. I think this next question is for Bonnie. Someone is asking, as a tea practitioner, regarding the transmission of heat within a teacup used for tea ceremony. Do the areas that of gold lacquer repair, kintsugi, versus the areas that are clay and ceramic, do they transmit heat differently, and is it palpable? Can you discern the difference in the transmission of heat in different areas of the tea bowl?
Not that I've noticed in the kintsugi tea bowls that I've handled. You can actually sometimes feel the kintsugi and sometimes you can't, depending on how high the kintsugi is. Sometimes it's very flat and sometimes it's just slightly raised, whether it's hiramakie or whatever. But I haven't heard that it makes a big difference because it's not a large area in general to heat. What does happen, however, is that if the repair goes all the way around, and sometimes the bowl will, the bowls age and they absorb the tea, and the color changes as the tea soaks into the crackle glaze, but it won't go above the kintsugi repair. So sometimes you get a two-tone piece. I've seen that once. It's very odd. So, I don't know if Gen's ever come across that.
Gen, do you have an opinion on that, about the transmission of heat once warm water is put inside a vessel?
I think it could, the heat will, it's a little bit harder to feel the heat than the ceramic surface. The urushi mostly closer to the wood surface, so you may not much effect to the heat to till your hand, the outside of the bowl. But as Bonnie said, it's mostly the kintsugi area is very thin and small, so it's kind of hard to feel the difference.
Okay, thank you. Actually, again, I have a question for you. What brought you in 2012 to pick up and move from Kyoto to come to New York?
Okay, so it's I'm not sure but now the kintsugi is kind of popping up and got very major, or get a little bit boom even in Japan or also in this country. But the urushi word, it still keep shrinking. Not many Japanese people use the urushi ware, like a teabowls, chopsticks anymore. We changed our culture into the Western culture. So actually the urushi word keep shrinking. So and also my father start to look up his work outside Japan, and he start work abroad, like mostly in Europe, to start from restorer, and now he's working as an artist as well. So yeah, I look up my father, and I also look up the urushi word in Japan. So I decide to go out as well as he did. Yeah.
Wonderful. My next question is for you also, from another learned colleague of ours, Frank Chance, asking if there are examples, either contemporary or antique, of kintsugi repairs done on urushi, on lacquer objects.
I don't think I have seen, but technically it's possible, but mostly to repair lacquerware, that urushi ware, we simply can reapply the whole lacquer to be invisible. So the major repair, for repair the lacquerware, so we mostly choose to just repaint the whole surface to be new piece. So it's very rare, or you need to add kintsugi on purpose to have kintsugi repaired urushi ware. So technically it's possible, but I think I haven't seen that kind of piece before. Maybe that's very interesting.
Fortunately, we just got on our chat, one of our viewers, John Toomey, says, quote, I have an antique portable tea set with 2 lacquer cups stacked around a natsume. One of the lacquer cups is cracked and repaired with kintsugi. So it has been done somewhere.
Right.
And again, maybe Louise, if she could chime in, maybe I'm wondering if there's anything in the Frears collection that might show that.
That's interesting.
Yep. Mina, question for you. Do you have any ceramics in your own collection that broke while you owned it and you decided to do a kintsugi repair? And as a collector, how do you determine if you're going to buy something with kintsugi, especially if it's contemporary, or one that's unrepaired? I mean, I would put Suzuki Goro in a separate category because that's intent. But what about a contemporary repair?
Well, I did have a contemporary vase break in transit from Japan, and it was a beautiful, very sort of extravagant and colorful creation by Hamada Shoji's grandson, Hamada Tomo, and it arrived broke, just completely shattered. So this is how I met Gen, actually, and he repaired it for me. And for me, that was meaningful because I also have another. It's not a henko; it's more of a square vase by Hamada Shoji, and it looks like something took like a baseball bat to it, so it was shattered in multiple pieces. So I have those two now side by side, the traditionally repaired piece by Hamada Shoji, and then the new piece by his grandson, so kindly and beautifully repaired by Gen. And then I had several more pieces just simply arrived broken in transit. Some of them I had repaired. Another one, well, the middle generation, Hamada Shinsaku, the Shoji's son. So now I have, it's kind of, it rhymes very beautifully. It's sort of a triptych. I have a kintsugi repair piece by each of the 3 generations of the Hamadas. But you're right, it's hard to determine sometimes, what you have, repaired, and it's mostly just crazy accidents of transit or me being a klutz, breaking something. Oops, yeah. But yes, I have several pieces like that.
Well, that's wonderful. Myself as a gallerist, and I ship hundreds of pieces per annum from Japan to New York, and then from New York to different points elsewhere. But accidents do happen. We've got great packers in Kyoto, but 1 out of every 300 pieces or so will arrive a wreck. And then as a gallerist, I have a dilemma because it is a business and it is insured. And if we put it back together again, what is the diminution of value? Is it even saleable? If a client or a museum was to buy it, are they interested in its reconstituted state? And I frequently get questions from appraisers, of which we have many in the audience tonight. If the piece is salvageable, what is the diminution of value? And if, let's say, the determination is, it depends on the owner, it's now pretty much worthless. the insurance company will typically insist on it be destroyed. And in one case, I acquired again, a Suzuki Goro enormous teapot, you know, sort of 3.5 feet tall. I bought it in a bizarre sale in Paris. It got shipped terribly by the Hotel Duo's people. It arrived with the handle detached. The thing was beyond patchwork, if you will. And the insurance company insisted we take a hammer to it. Insurance companies, I would argue, don't understand Kintsugi. We need to educate them.
Yes, but there's the counter argument, and yeah, I think the point was made that, you know, that typically, you know, in sort of the line of provenance of a piece, you know, I think Kintsugi needs to be a line item, duly documented and described. And just as with my own little sencha cup, I don't know the name of the Kintsugi artist who, you know, so to me that's a mystery. I would do anything to be able to know that. And I would lobby for this being part of the history of the object. And I don't believe at all you should take a hammer to these pieces.
Yes. It's heartbreaking either way. When you open the box and you see what's there, it's heartbreaking. Maybe I'll pass the last question on to Bonnie. Because we're sort of running out of time here. We learned on our last Zoom event, when we focused on chanoyu, that tea bowls and tea objects change with the seasons, or the selection, I should say, of the implements for tea change with the season. Do Kintsugi tea bowls have such a seasonal reference? And is there a particular time of year when you see them used more frequently in tea ceremony events?
Certainly, that's the case. As you can imagine, the metaphor of the tea bowl, whether or not it's articulated, fits very well with the autumn, when, you know, you're coming into the end of the year, or possibly during the early winter. And that's when you would generally see a tea bowl with a Kintsugi repair. You'd be served a tea bowl. I also want to say that in the tea room, I have never seen more than one Kintsugi piece used at a time, because a Kintsugi piece draws the attention, and it sort of breaks up the toreawaze, which is the how you put things together. It sort of breaks it up a little bit. So you wouldn't use a lot of Kintsugi in one go, unless you were making some statement in particular. So yeah, we see it in the autumn. You would see it in the early winter. You would not see it at New Year's. You probably wouldn't see it at spring. Yeah. Tea is only seasonal. It's not an option. Tea is seasonal. So, yeah.
Bonnie, could we turn back on the PowerPoint? I just wanted to end this with a few slides. I just wanted to show you the work of Kondo Takahiro. This is a new work by him that was in a show at the Mashko Museum, where someone who has always been focused on the perfect in porcelain and following the classic Sometsuke tradition is now contemplating totally intentionally distorted works. And the work of Fukumoto Fuku, a young artist who my gallery has featured for almost 2 decades. And here you see an artist who is intentionally deconstructed a thrown form, but instead of using lacquer repair, is using the glaze itself as an adherent, almost like a pique-à-jour approach to enamelware, to create a formerly solid piece into many layers with a translucent vase where light permeates. A different approach to Kintsugi, if you will. And lastly, I just wanted to show you a really congested shot of my gallery. And hopefully most of you have been there, but if you look at the cabinetry against the wall and you see this black horizontal line going across, when I worked with my architect designing this gallery, we opted for using recycled materials. And the pine that was used on these doors had all these cracks in it. And I guess I certainly didn't have the budget to do a gold lacquer repair on all these cabinets. So we used an acrylic, and we affected that kind of aesthetic using a polymer, and we could have made this into any color possible. But in this case, we did black so as not to detract from the works of art displayed on top of it. So there is an American repurposing of a Japanese aesthetic in a different way. So last slide, I just want to thank you all for being with us tonight. We're going to take a little hiatus in terms of Zoom talks, and we'll take the month of August off, but I will tell you we are totally booked through the year end 2021, good, I should say. The next talk coming up is once again co-hosted by the Crow Museum of Art with the exhibition of women's ceramicists at the with the collection, using the collection of Carol and Jeffrey Horvitz. And we will have in person on Zoom the wonderful 3 leading women artists of Japan, Hayashi Kaku from north of Tokyo outside of Mashiko, Futomura Yoshimi, who resides in Paris, and Fujikasa Satoko, who just is a new mom and lives in Tokyo. So that's something to stay tuned for. And the month after that, we will turn to the world of ukiyo-e with a panel on the Frank Lloyd Wright collection of Japanese prints owned by the Chazen Museum of Art at the University of Wisconsin. And our November panel will be on the subject of Celadon, coordinating with our solo show of the work of the unrivaled Kawase Shinobu. And then in December, I will be hosting or moderating a panel on contemporary Asian art for Asia Week New York. So thank you all for joining us tonight, being patient. This video will be available off our website, hopefully in another week under the video section and on our YouTube channel. Thank you very much, everyone. Stay safe, stay healthy, enjoy your summers, and hopefully we'll see you in September as the song goes. Thank you very much.